It's no secret that Christianity has been one of the world's most successful and impactful religions in human history. But what if I told you the reason for its success is also its greatest weakness and will contribute to its eventual downfall? Religions throughout history have changed and molded as their adherents face new challenges. For example, when people began to live closer together in larger cities, religious leaders began to teach against theft and began to promote caring for the poor. Or when certain civilizations became persecuted and oppressed, instead of focusing on the outside world, they focused on themselves and bred this idea of nationalism. The best religions always had an answer to every question and advice for every situation. Religions that couldn't offer support in such flexible ways couldn't promote social cohesion, which led to weaker societies that eventually got taken over by rival tribes. As an example of a very flexible text, let's use the Bible. This is a book that is really a compilation of many different books that amasses to over 1,000 pages and seemingly has an endless supply of knowledge contained within it. In fact, people are able to take passages written in a completely different context over 2,000 years ago and apply it to their everyday lives. Despite the characteristic of flexibility being a hallmark of successful religious movements, it's also one of its most egregious flaws. Religion's flexibility can be seen as ambiguity or equivocal, all of which represent different aspects of this characteristic of flexibility. Let me explain. In the middle of our scale, we have ambiguity. It's kind of the neutral term, and it's defined as having multiple definitions. Off to the left, we have flexibility. It is a positive, kind of advantageous aspect of ambiguity. In other words, the Bible, no matter who you are, where you are, can provide some solace and some advice for you due to its flexible nature. On the right, we have equivocalness, which is the negative aspect of this characteristic of flexibility. It is defined as subject to two or more interpretations and usually used to mislead or confuse. In other words, ambiguity has major consequences despite its advantages. And the rest of this video is going to be dedicated to discussing this topic. In order to show this, I'm going to list some major issues throughout history. And I want you to kind of think in your mind, which side was Christianity on? Now, we don't have time to cover every single one of these issues, but we're going to dive into two of them, one of which is slavery. So this seems like an obvious one. There's no way you can use the Christian Bible to justify the use of slavery. Or maybe you can. Looking at some biblical passages, we can see that there's kind of a hint of support for slavery. It's also important to note that Jesus, living in a world filled with slaves, never spoke up about this practice. However, at the same time, the Bible was used to oppose slavery through a variety of different passages. So slavery shows the negative aspect of that flexibility of religion. It shows that you can use the same source to both support and not support something as heinous as slavery. I think a very good way to understand this is really not that long ago. We can look at Frederick Douglass for a fantastic quote on exactly what we're talking about. He says, "I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land." Frederick Douglass in this quote is showing tons of hatred, but also confusion. And how can something as pure and as good as Jesus Christ in the Bible, how can that same Bible be used to support slavery? So next issue I just want to briefly touch on is women's rights. So there are biblical passages that are obviously against women's rights and have been used to say women shouldn't be able to vote, women shouldn't have a voice in the church, and so forth. However, at the same time, there's biblical passages that preach equality, that we're all equal in the eyes of God. So obviously there's an issue here with two different people reading the same book, but coming off with completely different conclusions. And there's a term for this. It's inter-rater reliability. And personally, I learned it in the context of the DSM-5 in one of my psychology courses. The DSM-5 is a standardized diagnostic manual for diagnosing mental illnesses. Its primary purpose is to ensure that every single practitioner, every single physician, psychiatrist, clinical psychologist is on the same page. The DSM-5 has been around I think now for about 70 years, maybe even more. And when the early editions were being published, they had horrible inter-rater reliability. In other words, two different practitioners could look at the exact same patient and come up with two completely different diagnoses. What's important to see here is where the responsibility was. The practitioners, the psychiatrists, didn't lose their licenses. No, it was seen as an issue with the DSM-5 or the DSM series. And what they did was revise the document. Now, applying this concept to the Bible, we see that it has horrible inter-rater reliability. And this was seen in our previous discussion, all these different topics that the Bible is actually supporting two contradictory positions on. This is why countless different Christian denominations exist. This is why horoscopes, astrological signs, and enneagrams work. They provide this extremely vague thing that we can project ourselves on and see really whatever we want. So I have a question for you and for everybody. Why is it that we demand inter-rater reliability? We demand consistency when it comes to things like the DSM-5, when it comes to mathematical proofs about understanding our universe. Yet when it comes to arguably what millions of people believe, billions of people believe, is the most important book ever written, this concept of inter-rater reliability is thrown out the door. It doesn't matter if the text is consistent or not. So why is this tolerated in a book that's supposed to set moral standards, that's supposed to tell us what's right and wrong, that's supposed to teach us about this supernatural creator that supposedly is individually invested in every single one of us? In my opinion, a work that can produce endless different interpretations runs the risk of becoming utterly meaningless. And to conclude this video, I want to end it with a quote by Albert Schweitzer, a theologian. He says, "The future of civilization depends on our overcoming the meaningless and hopelessness that characterizes the thoughts of men today." Perhaps that meaningless and hopelessness can be found in the Bible, and that our ability to progress as a civilization, to move forward, depends on throwing old thinking away. It's at least something to consider. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, and please consider subscribing. I will see you on the next one.